recently to cap how much people pay towards the costs of the care that they need. But they need to do much more to expand access to high quality care. That means addressing the really chronic staff shortages that we have in social care, making sure that providers of care are on a more stronger, sustainable footing, and then investing much more in publicly funded care for people who are going to struggle to afford it.
And what state are care homes in right now? Are they back to something resembling normality?
I think it's quite variable, given that we've still got quite high rates of COVID around in the community. So they're having to take a lot of precautions, even now. But we are still very much waiting for. It's almost back to where we were before the pandemic. So an underfunded system that is really struggling to meet need. And while NHS funding has been protected in real terms, spending on social care has actually gone down quite substantially.
Tim Gardner, Senior Policy Fellow at the Health Foundation, thanks so much for joining us. Reacting to that news in the last hour, the High Court has ruled that the government broke the law by failing to protect more than 20,000 care home residents. Right, coming up, we will bring you PMQs Unpacked. Go online to either the Times website or go to YouTube. You can watch along live as Tim Shipman and I pause the action as Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson clash across the dispatch box. It's PMQs Unpacked next.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. PMQs Unpacked is next. First, a look at the headlines this lunchtime. And as we were just hearing, High Court judges have ruled that the policy of discharging patients from hospitals to care homes at the start of the pandemic was unlawful. The ruling said the government failed to account for the risk to elderly and vulnerable residents from non-symptomatic COVID transmission. A spokesperson for the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, said the court found he had acted reasonably. Labour has accused the government of allowing radicalisation in prisons to become rampant. The Justice Secretary has announced the creation of 3 new isolation centres to keep influential terrorists away from other prison inmates. But Labour's Steve Reed said Dominic Raab had failed to act on earlier warnings. And Russia has denied it is attempting to blackmail Europe after cutting gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria. Gazprom said it cut the supplies after Poland and Bulgaria refused to pay in rubles. The EU Commission President condemned the decision and said the bloc was mapping out a joint response. And we'll bring you a full news and sport update at 12:30. But now, here on Times Radio, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Yeah, very good afternoon to you. It's Matt Chorley here on Times Radio. If you're watching along on the Times website or on the Times Radio YouTube channel, we are live as well. Tim Shipman, Chief Political Commentator for the Sunday Times, is here. Tim, how are you?
Oh, very well, Matt.
We're already, it comes around quicker and quicker. Another end of term PMQs. They've only been back for 2 weeks. They're off again next week to prepare for the Queen's speech. What do you think Keir Starmer will choose to go at?
I mean, the only sadness is it's not Angela Rayner across the dispatch box, isn't it? Keir Starmer's
Surely Keir Starmer could have got a bit of COVID or something.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to flash his tightly done up top button at Boris Johnson and we'll see what happens. I mean, well, they could leap on the running news story on COVID and take that back to Boris Johnson's decisions at the start of the pandemic. I think more likely we'll, since it's end of term and we've got local elections and Labour are campaigning hard on the cost of living, I'd be very surprised if we didn't hear quite a chunk of that. Be interesting to see if they delve into immigration. There's an urgent question on the government's plans coming, and it's been a sort of a running sore for the government. But Labour have traditionally been a little bit queasy about getting stuck into immigration. So I would think we will have Keir Starmer's best local election messages ad infinitum.
Yes, closely followed by Boris Johnson's main local election messages.
Ad infinitum. Stick around, we've got 6 of these exciting questions.
What's your sense, the mood amongst Tory MPs and their attitude towards Boris Johnson right now?
I think it's pretty febrile. I think there's a general sense that they want to see the local election results and they want to see how many more times the Prime Minister is fined. My general sense as an old soak is that we've been up this hill many times with previous Prime Ministers, and Tory MPs generally find excuses not to do things rather than to do things. But there's certainly the view in Downing Street is that he isn't quite out of the woods yet. If he can survive until the summer, then he probably fights the next election. There is a window after those local elections up to a sort of the end of July where things could be pretty testy for the Prime Minister. But he's had these trials and tribulations before, and he's ridden them out. So I'm not putting huge sums of money on him going.
Well, there we are. Here we go then. This is PMQs Unpacked. Welcome along if you are watching online. Marie is in Indiana. Mr. Fox is in Liverpool. Amanda's in France. Steve's in Cambridge. Stephen in Taunton. Nice to have you with us. Mickey in Plymouth. Lou in Pennsylvania. We've got people watching in Yorkshire, Bedford, Bangkok, Manchester, Germany, Cape Town. Go online to the Times Radio YouTube channel. You can watch along as we go. We go live to the House of Commons. This is question number 1 from Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Prime Minister will have whipped his backbenchers to scream and shout, and that's fine. That's fine. But I hope he's also sent a clear message that there's no place for sexism and misogyny or looking down on people because of where they come from in his party, in this House, or in modern Britain. Next year, Mr. Speaker, the UK is set for the slowest growth and the highest inflation in the G7. Why is he failing to manage the economy?
Mr. Speaker, well, let me first of all say, in response to what the right honourable gentleman has said about sexism and misogyny, that I exchanged messages with the right honourable lady over the weekend, and I repeat what I said to her. There can be absolutely no place for such behaviour or such expression in this House, and we should treat each other, Mr. Speaker, frankly, with the respect that each other deserves. So, and on his point about the economy, yes, of course, it is true that there is a crisis of global inflation around the world, but this government is tackling it with all sorts of ways that you would expect, Mr. Speaker, helping people with the cost of their energy, British energy, far more, by the way, than the Labour will put in, a British energy security strategy to undo the mistakes of previous Labour governments, Mr. Speaker, but above all, making sure that we have the fastest growth in the G7 last year, which would not have been possible if we listened to him. And if we listened to him, we would have frankly never have come out of lockdown, Mr. Speaker, in July last year. And never forget, Mr. Speaker, that no Labour government has left office with unemployment lower than when they came in.
Let's pause it there.
Early use of the bell.
Early use of the bell, therefore, you would still be in lockdown. I'm sure that Captain Hindsight is only just around the corner. We should point out that Angela Rayner is sitting to Keir Starmer's left on the front bench.
With a very dignified look on her face.
Yes.
Nodding her head sagely, rather than sort of shouting and hollering like she has sometimes been known
Which
to do.
Occasionally
does.
Might be known. Do you think, I was about to say, has this story got legs? And I've realised the problem. This story can't rumble on for another day, can it?
No, I mean, anything is capable of rumbling on for another day in this world. But, I mean, I think it's one of those where it sort of has worked quite well for the Labour Party. There are some people who don't quite trust Angela Rayner's denials that she's been joking about this. But at the same time, by playing the indignation card, it has whipped up a whole sort of generational and gender battle, which probably works quite well for the Labour Party and paints the Tories as a bunch of old-fashioned sexists. And if you are in the business of winning elections and trying to tar your opponents, I think that's probably a decent win, which has turned what could have been a sort of negative to a reasonable positive for both herself and for her party. Quite how much it's cut through, I'm not clear yet. I haven't sat in any focus groups and listened to this, but it's the sort of thing that does cut through because it's just a bit more interesting than your average political ding-dong. And it's not probably very helpful for the government. And there's now stories breaking that Tory ministers have been watching pornography.
I was about to mention
on the front bench of the House of Commons.
There's a new front on this. Pippa Creer from the Daily Mirror reporting a Tory front bencher was watching porn on his mobile phone in the House of Commons while sitting alongside a female minister. The minister told colleagues about the incident, which happened the last few months, at a highly charged meeting of Tory MPs in Westminster last night. 3 sources said that around a dozen women MPs at the meeting shared accounts of alleged sexism and harassment by their colleagues.
And Stephen Swinford of the Times is now saying he's got a second person doing this, and a female former minister who I would trust with my life has messaged me to say that these stories are true.
Well, we'll see. All eyes then on the front bench during PMQs to see who's doing what. Let's go back to question number 2 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he sounds like the comical alley of the cost of living crisis. He pretends the economy is booming, but where there are problems, they're global. But in the real world, our growth is set to be slower than every G20 country except one, Russia. And our inflation is going to be double the rest of the G7. Does he think that denying the facts, staring him in the face, makes things better or worse for working people?
Mr. Speaker, the facts are, as the IMF has said, that the UK came out of COVID faster than anybody else. That's why we had the fastest growth in the G7 last year. That would not have happened, Mr. Speaker, if we'd listened to Captain Hindsight. And if he studies their forecast, we will return to being the fastest by 2024 and the fastest in 2025, Mr. Speaker. That's what the IMF's forecasts say. He asks about. Read it. He asks about working people, Mr. Speaker. This is the government. This is the party that supports working people. Unlike them, with the biggest increase. Yes, I'll tell you what's going up. The living wage is going up, Mr. Speaker, by record amounts. Employment is going up, Mr. Speaker, by record amounts. 500,000 more people. They don't want to hear. Let me give them the figures. 500,000 more people in paid employment now than there were before the pandemic began, and youth unemployment at or near record lows. Under Labour, just to remind you, everybody, under Labour, youth unemployment rose by 45%.
So, that's Boris Johnson's response. Now, the reason that this is particularly pertinent, the reason that Keir Starmer is pushing this point about what the IMF have said about projected growth is that Boris Johnson repeatedly has boasted that Britain has had the fastest growth in the G7. He did it on the 15th of September, the 5th of January, the 31st of January, the 2nd of February, the 21st of February, and the 9th of March. He talked about having the fastest growth in the G7. I'm sure there were other examples where he's used slightly different wording. You can't take all the credit last year and then try to ignore the fact we're bottom of the league table almost this year.
Well, you sort of can, because this is politics, and there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, but the worst statistics of all are growth projections, which even someone who works for the ABR would tell you are literally never correct. So yes, you grab the numbers you want and you display them, and you'll swiftly expose as a hypocrite shortly afterwards, and then you'll find some new numbers. And as Boris Johnson did, he said, well, next year the projections, they're great. They're really going to be great again.
Yes, we'll just ignore the gloomy bit. And actually, part of the only reason we were the fastest growing last year was because we had such a terrible economic slump.
Exactly. We went deeper than everybody else.
So we bounced back. Yeah.
It's very good of you not to draw even any reference to the comical alley of the cost of living crisis.
I think the response from the House of Commons chamber confirmed.
There was one sort of cackle.
Oh no, we're not laughing at that.
It's all a bit 2003. I mean, that's literally nearly 20 years ago, comical alley, and there'll be a very large number of people who have absolutely no idea.
The comical alley of the cost of living crisis obviously sounded better in the meeting.
My guess is you will not be dinging your bell. I don't think that's going to be making a return. Repeated use. No.
I suspect we might get another Captain Hindsight. But anyway, Tim Shipman's here with me. We're doing PMQs Unpacked. You can listen along live on Times Radio, watch along live on the Times Radio YouTube channel and on the Times website on the Politics Live page. Let's go back now. This is question number 3 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this must be the Oxford Union debating skills we've been hearing so much about.
The reference to the Angela Rayner story again.
rambling incoherently, throwing in garbled metaphors. Powerful stuff, Prime Minister.
Garbled metaphors from the comical Ali.
It's not just his words that are complacent.
That was bold.
It's his actions as well. The cost of living crisis was blindingly obvious months ago. Yes. But he said worries about inflation were unfounded. Yeah. And he backed a tax-hiking budget. Yeah. Does he think that his choice to be the only leader in the G7 to raise taxes during a cost of living crisis has made things better or worse for working people?
Mr. Speaker, as I've just explained to the House, and I'll repeat it once more, this government and our Chancellor cut taxes on working people. The national insurance contribution went down, Mr. Speaker, by an average of £330. But if he's talking about the health and care levy, maybe that's what he's droning on about. Look at the health and care levy, Mr. Speaker. That is what is enabling us to pay for 50,000 more nurses, to pay for clearing the COVID backlogs. How tragic, how pitiful that the party of Bevan should now be opposed to that investment in the NHS, Mr. Speaker.
Right, let's jump in there. Interestingly, so Keir Starmer's talking about Boris Johnson said that fears about inflation were unfounded. Angela Rayner, do you remember her? She brought up the same quote back in January, and Boris Johnson denied saying it. Said, I've said no such thing. Inflation is always something we have to be careful about. But back in October, in an interview with Sky News, Boris Johnson said, he was asked, are you worried about inflation? He replied, people have been worrying about inflation for a very long time. I'm looking at robust economic growth. And by the way, those fears have been unfounded. So you can make up your own minds about that. I'm not sure we're learning a huge amount or progressing terribly far.
No, but the inflation one's interesting because, of course, Rishi Sunak was telling Boris Johnson that inflation was going to be a problem in the middle of last year and wasn't being listened to. So he'll be watching all this with a degree of
Is he there? I haven't
interest.
clocked him on the front bench.
He's not in the sort of narrow cut shot, is he? Probably just
at home counting his money or something.
Sitting on a bench, feeling a bit sorry for himself, I suspect.
OK, but let's hope that this picks up a little bit. PMQs Unpacked. We'll go back to question number 4 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he's an ostrich, perfectly happy keeping his head in the sand. Working people are worried about paying their bills. They're spending less and cutting back. That's bad for business and bad for growth. Yeah. Working people are looking for help. But this week, millions will look at their payslip and see a tax rise with his fingerprints all over it. Does he think that his 15th tax rise has made things better or worse for working people?
Mr. Speaker, what we're doing for working people is not only lifting the living wage by the record amount, helping people on universal credit with a £1,000 tax cut, Mr. Speaker, but also cutting national insurance contributions, lifting the threshold so that on average people pay £330 less, Mr. Speaker. But what we're also doing is taking our country and our economy forward, investing in our NHS, which is a priority for the people of this country, unlike for the Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, but also ensuring that we have record creation of jobs, Mr. Speaker, and that is what matters. High wage, high skill jobs. 500,000 more. They don't care about jobs, Mr. Speaker. We do. We believe in high wage, high skill jobs, and that's the answer for the economy.
I mean, apart from having a terrible joke writing session this morning.
I mean, it's really bad. He's an ostrich.
He's an ostrich. He's comical alley. What was it? His comical alley of the cost of living crisis.
I mean, this is back to Ed Miliband, isn't it? Some of this, it really is.
I don't understand what Keir Starmer's trying to do, because if you just go on, isn't the economy terrible and you're making a mess of it? Boris Johnson's going to stand up and say, no, everything's going really well.
But if you're just talking past each other so you can both clip your answers and stick them on Twitter, then I guess I'm
sure ostrich
they feel like they're achieving something.
Well, ostriches famously can't fly.
I mean, one doesn't want to put off listeners at 17 minutes past the hour, but
If you think you've got a better question, if you were Keir Starmer, He's got, 2 questions left. If you've got a better question for him to ask, get in touch. You can text me, 87222, start your message with the word Times. Tweet us at Times Radio. You can post a comment on the YouTubes.
This is where we sort of have to build up excitement about the perorations.
Yes, the peroration. It's all going to be about the
around
peroration.
for the peroration.
What question would you ask? Do you think Keir Starmer should ask? A single question. 87222, start your message with the word Times. Tweet us at Times Radio. Post on the YouTubes. What question should Keir Starmer ask? We'll go back with a sense of, I don't know. What is it?
Concealed dread.
Hope over experience. I think it's one of the. How bad can these jokes get? That's what you're going to hang on for. Here we go. Let's go. Question number 5 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it's as if he's only just waking up to the cost of living crisis. And his big idea, fewer MOTs. It actually makes the Cones hotline sound visionary and inspirational.
Oh, dear.
North Sea oil producers are making so
winded
much
by that one.
unexpected profit, they call themselves a cash machine. Yes. That cash could be used to keep energy bills down. Instead, he chooses to protect their profits. Let household bills rocket and slap taxes on working people who are earning a living. Yeah. Does he think that choice has made things better or worse for working people?
What we're doing is making things better for working people than his plans would do by a mile, Mr. Speaker. We're raising more. We're putting more to support people with their energy costs than he would with his new tax on business. £9.1 billion that we're putting in, an immediate £150 cut in people's council tax. Their thing only raises £6.6 billion. And what it does is it clobbers the very businesses that we need to invest in energy to bring the prices down for people across this country. Clean, green energy, the wind farms, the hydrogen that this country needs. And what this government is also doing, Mr. Speaker, is reversing the tragic, historic mistake of the Labour Party in refusing to invest in nuclear. We're going to have a nuclear reactor every year and not a nuclear reactor every decade, which is what we got under Labour.
Keir Starmer just asked the same question 2 or 3 times now.
With an even older joke about the Cones hotline.
Well, I've just looked up.
1992.
June 1992. Put it in your diaries. We'll mark 30 years of the Cones hotline.
Literally 30-year-old joke.
A 30-year-old joke about the Cones hotline. That's going to bang on TikTok with the young people.
Well, quite. We started with a 19-year-old joke and we've now advanced to a 30-year-old joke.
If he doesn't round this off with a sort of "Are you being served?" pun,
I'll be half Hopman.
Well, none of you have really come up with any better suggestions. Lou said if he should ask, if you get another notice, will you resign? Lots of you asking, is Rishi Sunak there? Where's Priti Patel? That's all good questions. Tom is saying he could be asking about the COVID loan cash. This story, that's proper, like right across the front of the Times. Suitcases stuffed full of COVID loan cash seized at UK border. That's something you could, the chance is not even there. They've written off nearly £5 billion lost to fraud. That's how you. Anyway, Tom was also suggesting the care home ruling this morning. Matt says 12 years they've been in power, blaming Labour can't have that much more capital. Surely, I don't know. We've just had a Cones hotline joke. It's all happening.
Boris Johnson pledging a nuclear reactor every year seems to me one that the Labour Party will probably want to return to in future as well.
Yes. Stand by your beds, everyone. It's time for the peroration for the final exchange for possibly one of the worst PMQs we've had for a while.
Well, I've enjoyed it.
Well, I mean, it's always nice to see you, Tim. I think we had a much nicer chat if it weren't so rudely interrupted by
this absolute dreck.
Right, hold on to your spines, folks, because they are going to tingle. We go back to the House of Commons for the final question from Keir Starmer.
So they're the party of excess oil and gas profits, and we're the party of working people. Tory government's had its head in the sand throughout the cost of living crisis. First, they let prices get out of control. Then they denied it was happening. They failed to do anything about it, and then they made it worse with higher taxes. Because of his choices, we are set to have the slowest growth and the highest inflation in the G7. Mr. Speaker, a vote for Labour next week is a vote for a very different set
Ah, there we are. Well done, Tim.
We would ask oil and gas companies to pay their fair share and reduce energy costs. We wouldn't hammer working people with the worst possible tax at the worst possible time.
Lots of Tory
We'd
MPs calling for the
insulate
Speaker to intervene
bills,
on this.
Insulate homes to get bills down. And we'd close the tax avoidance schemes that have helped his Chancellor, where is he, reduce his family's tax bill while putting everyone else's up. That's a proper plan for the economy. So why doesn't he get on with it and finally make choices that make things better, not worse, for working people?
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the right honourable gentleman, I listened to him over many weeks, so many years, this guy is doomed to be a permanent spectator, Mr. Speaker, because we have a plan to fix the NHS and fix social care. They have no plan. We have a plan to fix our borders with our deal with Rwanda. They have no plan. We have a plan to take our economy forward. They have no plan. Let me tell you something, Mr. Speaker. He talks about the elections. He talks about the elections in a few days' time, Mr. Speaker. Let me remind him that everywhere you look, a Labour administration, it is a bankrupt shambles, Mr. Speaker. Hammersmith Council spent Labour-run Hammersmith spent £27,000 on EU flags, Mr. Speaker, 2 years after the referendum. Labour-run Nottingham Council bankrupt because of their investment in some communist energy plan of the kind that he now favours. He should apologise for it. Labour-run Croydon bankrupt, Mr. Speaker, because of their dodgy property deals. And never forget, Labour-run Britain in 2010, bankrupt because of what the Labour government did. And they said they had no money left. Mr. Speaker, he looks at council tax. Look at the difference between, he boasts he lives in Islington or Camden or somewhere like that. He should contrast neighbouring Westminster, which has the lowest council tax in the country, and better services too. That's the difference between Labour and Conservative across the country, Mr. Speaker. Vote Conservative on the 5th of May.
Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Well, on behalf of everyone at Times Mate, can I apologise about subjecting you to that? Well, there we are. Tim Shipman.
Boris Johnson did quite well for about the first 30 seconds of that 9-minute answer. He was pithier than Starmer, then he just started to ramble. I mean, it would be very legitimate for anyone listening to all of those exchanges to decide not to vote for anybody on May the 5th.
They are the party of excess oil and gas profits. We are the party of working
that
people.
On your flag and
there we
smoke
are.
it. Good Lord.
What's going on? Why aren't they better, Tim?
Just silence. I don't know what to say to that. I mean, both sides have got some good people working for them, and they, this Labour operation is much more competent than its predecessor, and Boris Johnson's new operation is a little bit sharper than phase 2 of his Downing Street team. But my goodness me, I mean, we bemoan the fact that they disappear on holiday or disappear for Purdah and all these things, but frankly, if that's the standard, let's hope they take the next 6 months off.
It sort of doesn't, I mean, I don't really understand what Keir Starmer's driving at. It's just such a waste of, there's so much, you go through the papers, literally looking on the front of the Times today, you've got Russia, you've got P&O, which Boris Johnson a few weeks ago said they were going to face the full force of the law. They've got no plan for that. You've got COVID loans. I mean, literally just going through the Times, you could find things to talk about.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, you and I think there are two ways to approach it that you and I would advocate. One of which is slowly building an argument through 6 questions and ending with a crescendo. The other is that you sort of wrong-foot the Prime Minister by constantly dancing from subject to subject and giving him a pounding on 6 things that might catch light. And he didn't really do either of those today.
Tom says, I'd rather watch paint dry than listen to any more of this dross. I think he's referring to Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer rather than you and I.
Let us hope so.
I think people are really enjoying what we're doing. What do you think will happen next week? Do you think the local election is going to be so bad that Boris Johnson will have to go?
Well, there's a lot of expectation management going on. I saw one report that the Tories might lose 1,000 seats. They're only defending 1,300. So that really, I mean, if they did lose 1,000 seats, that would be catastrophic. But the fact that that's been brief makes me think they're going to lose, they expect to lose 300 or 400 rather than 1,000. I mean, everyone you speak to in the Tory party claims it's going to be absolutely terrible. I suspect that means it'll be quite bad. But I think it will take a combination of local election results and more fines for it to become a live issue again. And Rishi Sunak's implosion is not without consequence. It means that there isn't, it's even less obvious who he would replace the Prime Minister if he were to go. And that will be a consideration for a lot of people. There's a mood developing for Jeremy Hunt. Everyone agrees Jeremy Hunt's a grown-up. Some people rather like Jeremy Hunt. But a lot of the people who are most upset with Boris Johnson are not people who particularly want Jeremy Hunt to be the leader of their party. So you do wonder whether the situation is quite there. Obviously, if it's really, really, really bad, anything is possible, because Boris Johnson's argument to his party has always been that he's got more chance of winning elections than the rest of them. And for the most part, they've bought shares in that for the last few years. They've had a few wobbles along the way. But if that changes, he can disappear quite quickly. But it's not immediately obvious to me who would be doing radically better at this point.
Oh, you sort of wonder if it could be any worse. Anyway, Mike says, I'm very much enjoying your and Tim's Prime Minister's questions comments today. So there we are, that's something like that. Bill says, a better comeback from Captain Hindsight. Called Johnson major disappointment. That's not bad, is it?
It's not bad.
That's
better than the Cones hotline, isn't it?
Better than the Cones hotline. Almost anything would be better than a 30-year-old joke about the Cones hotline. But there we are. Well, we will bring you the best of the rest. We will.
Here we are. we're literally praying for Ian Blackford at this point.
At this point, we are looking forward to Ian Blackford. We'll bring you Ian Blackford and some of the other backbench contributions to PMQs in just a moment. This is Matt Chorley on Times Radio with Visa, connecting you to the businesses you love. Let's get the very latest news from Rachel Jewell.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. The High Court's ruled the government broke the law by failing to protect vulnerable people in care homes during the COVID outbreak. 2 women brought the case after losing their fathers to the virus. During March and April 2020, residents were hurriedly discharged from hospitals without testing. David Crabtree, who owns care homes in West Yorkshire, says the former Health Secretary's policies put people at risk.
We were given no help, no support whatsoever. Social services, social care was left to be thrown under the bus. Mr. Hancock, his ring of protection, left us without a prayer.
Russia's being accused of blackmailing European nations after cutting off gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria. Moscow says it's turned it off because they've refused to pay in rubles. The Transport Secretary's refused to confirm the government's considering scrapping annual MOT tests, but told MPs it's the policy is regularly reviewed. Ministers have suggested safety checks could take place every 2 years to help motorists with the surging cost of living. Police who stopped and handcuffed 2 Olympic athletes in London are facing gross misconduct charges. 5 officers have been investigated after Bianca Williams and Ricardo dos Santos were pulled over while driving with their baby in July 2020. Dry with variable cloud this afternoon. The best of the sunshine will be in the south and the west. Feeling a little chillier than yesterday, but pleasant in the sunshine. Tom Clayton has the sports.
The former Real Madrid president, Ramon Calderón, says the striker Karim Benzema is a major factor in why the club is still in their Champions League semi-final tie. Madrid were beaten 4-3 by Manchester City, but Benzema scored twice to keep the tie alive. Calderón had high praise for the French striker.
He is in a very good shape this season. He showed that against PSG and Chelsea. He's helping a lot our club to win matches and to score goals. So it's perhaps the best season of Benzema in our club.
Well, despite victory in the first leg of the tie, Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola insists the job is still not done. Guardiola is confident his team can replicate the performance in the return leg and says he'll set his team up to win.
To win this competition, for my small experience, is that you have to overcome situations like football give in front of you. So even the result could have been better. Madrid is always Bernabeu is Madrid. It doesn't matter with 1-0 up or 2 or 3 always.
TalkSport will bring you live commentary of next week's second leg in Madrid. The American bidders hoping to take over Chelsea have reportedly flown into London to make a final pitch to officials. The consortium, headed by LA Dodgers owner Todd Boehly, will set out plans for stadium redevelopment as well as make final clarifications on funding. Yesterday, the Sports Minister Nigel Huddleston said talks remain positive. All of Scotland's, Wales and Northern Ireland's international football matches will be exclusively broadcast on streaming service Viaplay from 2024. A deal's been agreed by the Nordish broadcaster with UEFA for the rights to screen World Cup and Euro qualifiers as well as Nations League and friendly matches. Viaplay will launch in the UK later this year, with the company in discussions about making some fixtures free to air. The contract does not include England games. And Formula One's governing body is supposedly holding up plans to increase the number of sprint races next season. The teams unanimously backed plans to have 6 events next year as opposed to this year's 3, but the FIA says it's evaluating the impact of the proposal on its trackside operations and personnel. Tonight, TalkSport will bring you live updates of the second Champions League semi-final first leg as Liverpool take on Villarreal.
This is Times Radio.
Climate change hasn't won. We can bring life back. Download WWF's My Footprint app to find out how.
Matt Chorley on Times Radio with Visa, supporting small businesses on their digital journey.
Very good afternoon to you. It's Matt Chorley live on Times Radio and still on the YouTube channel. I just forgot, so I need to remember that during the news we are still live on camera and not to pull silly faces. Tim Shipman, Chief Political Commentator for the Sunday Times, is still here. How are you, Tim?
I think I've recovered.
You've recovered from all of the giddy excitement of Keir Starmer.
I also was amused by a message I just received suggesting that, given all this sort of Tory smut, that they are now the party of war and order.
Oh, very good.
Which may be making light of a serious.
That's much better than anything else we've
situation, but edges out comical alley, I think.
And he's an ostrich.
Yes.
Right, very good. Well, let's see if some of the backbench contributions could be any better. And never before have we looked forward to this more. I'm delighted to say we can go to the House of Commons and hear from Ian Blackford.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Leader of the Opposition and the absolutely disgusting misogyny and sexism that was witnessed by the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. That should shame us all, what has happened over the last few days. Mr. Speaker, this morning the Trussell Trust confirmed that 830,000 children across the UK are being left to depend on emergency food parcels. So instead of convening a Tory talking shop at Cabinet, the Prime Minister should be acting to help those children and help families through the cost of living emergency. If he is genuinely looking for ideas to tackle this Tory-made crisis, he'd be wiser to look beyond his Cabinet colleagues, who of course know that he won't be there for very much longer. So, as a parting gift, here's an idea for the Prime Minister. The Scottish Government has introduced and now doubled the game-changing Scottish child payment of at least £1,040 a year, helping those families who are being the hardest hit. Is the Prime Minister prepared to match this payment across the UK to help families through this emergency?
Mr. Speaker, what we're doing to help families, and of course, it's important to do everything we can to help families in a tough time. And that's why we've massively increased the funds available to local councils to support families that are having a particular hardship. The Holidays and Activities Fund, now running at £200 million, is there as well. We will do everything we can to support families throughout this period when we're dealing with the aftershocks of the COVID pandemic, Mr. Speaker. But if I may say so, I think this is another example, and he may not appreciate me pointing this out, but it is true, as another example of the vital strength of our economic union and the importance of support from the UK Treasury, which is what he gets.
Oh, well, there we are. On a similar vein to Keir Starmer in terms of on the cost of living, but slightly more pointed, or at least sort of practical.
It's practical, and actually his denunciation of the sexism as disgusting was actually rather stronger than Starmer's as well, interestingly.
Well, also it was sort of on point. You know, he explains what it was. I didn't have to chip in and say he's talking about Angela Rayner. You know, it wasn't in the abstract. and the way that Keir Starmer did. But anyway, Ian Blackford's got his video for the local elections in Scotland too. In the interest of balance, let's now hear from Caroline Lucas, of course, the Green MP down in Brighton. Let's see what she had to say at PMQs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 56 members of this House are under investigation for sexual misconduct, and that includes 3 of his cabinet ministers. The Prime Minister has just rightly said that there can be no place for sexism and misogyny in this House. So can he now confirm whether he considers that sexual harassment, apparently unlike bullying and lying, is grounds for dismissal under the Ministerial Code?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, sexual harassment is intolerable, and it's quite right that members should now have a procedure by which they can bring that to the attention of the House authorities. And I think that's a good thing. And of course, it's grounds for dismissal.
Well, there we are. It's the grounds for dismissal. But the thing is, we don't know who these people are or what the seriousness of the allegations are, Tim.
No, because the whole system is predicated on anonymity in order to get people to come forward. Obviously, it's a potential, a couple of unexploded bombs there with cabinet ministers involved, but and it's a staggering number of people, frankly. That's effectively 1 in 6 of the House of Commons currently under investigation for some form of misconduct, which is a lot. But anyone who's spent a lot of time around the place knows it's a pretty febrile, intense place where... and it's an industry that attracts people of a certain disposition. A lot of risk takers, a lot of people who have a high regard for themselves and not necessarily a high regard for everybody they're working with.
So that's the pitch from Caroline Lucas. Let's round things off then. We'll get a view from Northern Ireland now. Jim Shannon is a DUP MP for Strangford, talking to Boris Johnson about Brexit.
Speaker, last week the Daily Telegraph, not normally a paper that I read, but I did read this headline that said Northern Ireland could be forced to follow EU rules on COVID tests. The Chancellor told the House that Northern Ireland could benefit from moves to scrap VAT on energy efficiency measures because of the protocol. So now the protocol's restrictions threaten the shortage of COVID tests in Northern Ireland. So can I ask the Prime Minister, the financial cost of the protocol can be measured, but the true cost in relation to VAT, to medicines, to COVID tests and damaged relationships is much greater. When is the government and my Prime Minister going to restore our place in the United Kingdom?
I thank you very much. And there is clearly an economic cost to the protocol. And that is also now turning into a political problem and an imbalance in sentiment about it. We need to rectify that balance for the sake of the Good Friday Agreement on which this country depends.
I mean, this is of all the things which might become a massive story at the end of next week, Tim, never mind Boris Johnson's future and expectation management on councillors, what happens in Northern Ireland could be huge.
I'm getting on a plane to Belfast in about 2 hours. So read the Sunday
Times
at the weekend.
You're that horrified by what happened at PMQs, you're planning to leave the mainland. Explain why, just for people who haven't been sort of following this.
Because it looks like Sinn Féin is on course to become the largest party in the Northern Ireland Assembly. That means that de facto they will be entitled to provide a First Minister. The DUP, ever since jumping into bed with the Tories and backing Brexit, have been going a little bit backwards. They are in retreat. They've tried to make the campaign about the Northern Ireland Protocol. That hasn't quite worked. And there are some people who think that Sinn Féin might win the elections in the Irish Republic in a few years' time as well, and that then puts us in a position where we've been talking about Scottish independence for a long time, but it could be that a united Ireland is going to become a more pressing political issue. And clearly it has implications for Britain's relationship with the European Union as well, because the DUP take a hard line on Brexit in the same way that this government does. And that's going to be something that's a lot more difficult if Sinn Féin are running the show over there. They're close to the American Democrats, who have made clear that they don't want Britain mucking about with Northern Ireland. And you could have a sort of three-cornered chess game It's just a fascinating story that hasn't had nearly enough coverage in the papers, and I'm going to go and see what it's all about.
Lovely stuff. You can read all that on Sunday. It's Tim Shipman, Chief Political Commentator of the Sunday Times. Thanks so much for that, Tim. This text just about sums things up. I think, again, this is talking about the House of Commons rather than us. I think if that's the best they can now be offered after a week's effort in our political epicentre, and by all of whom will be earning a multitude more than I do, then I simply have to despair, chaps. A grumpy old man texting.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the first person in despair over the last few years, is it?
Anyway, there we are. Thank you very much, Tim. Nice to see you. We'll plough on and do our best to entertain the nation, even if those in the House of Commons can't. Matt Chorley on Times Radio. That brings us to the end of PMQs Unpacked. Thanks so much for watching on YouTube and on the Times website as well. And if you're on the Times website, then head to the Politics Live page. We'll keep you up to date with all the very latest news. Top of that right now, this story of 2 Tory MPs accused of watching pornography on phones in the Commons chamber. We'll get the very latest on that. We'll go live to Westminster. Lucy Fisher is there. We'll find out the very latest. The talk of the whips have already launched an investigation. We'll get some more of that in just a moment. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio with Visa, supporting small businesses on their digital journey.
Times Radio.
I'm Kate Borsay, and I'll be with you every Friday, Saturday and Sunday night on Times Radio from 10 till 1. We'll be digesting the day's and the week's news in a more considered way, looking at what's happened, when and how it affects you, how it affects our listeners. So what are the questions that you need answered?
Trusted news, insight and opinion that speaks for itself.
The most important thing really is that the show will be an extension of our daily thoughts and observations about the